Welcome back everyone to another reaction video. So I have been hard at work today actually recording for the gaming channel. So if you haven't watched the gaming channel lately or didn't even know I had one, it's called VTH Gaming and the link is in the description of every video to my other channels. We just started a new series on Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. I'm playing as the German Empire, and in episode 2, which is going live today, we finished up our war with the Spanish and got into a war with the Soviet Union. And there was an epic, huge battle at the end where I was outnumbered 3-1, and it went really, really well. Let's just say that. So if you want to check it out, the link is in the description to the gaming channel. It's Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, and episode 2 will be live later today. In the meantime, we're going to dive into some more extra history, one of our favorite channels. This is not a series. This is a one-off video. It's the disastrous history of the first transatlantic cable. I have a little bit of knowledge of these events. So I'll do what I can to add to what they do already so well in telling the story. The link is in the description to the original content. One of my favorite channels. Could not recommend them to you more. If you want to learn about all sorts of different parts of history in a way that's engaging and interesting, Extra History is a great channel for that. Let's go ahead and dive in. I almost forgot. I had to come back and let you guys know about this because I did tell them that I would mention it. Extra History actually has a Kickstarter campaign that has actually already been fully funded. It's a 2025 calendar called History Happens Every Day. And it's basically a really cool design calendar with their artwork and their unique style on it. And then it's just filled with all kinds of great historical facts and telling you something that happened every single day. And it gives you something on their calendar with a video that applies to that with QR codes, the whole bit. I'm putting a link down in the pinned comment right below this video and in the description, so you guys can check that out. Extra History has been incredibly kind to me in their support of what I do with reacting to their videos, and I've done so much of their content. I think the very least we could do to say thank you is to support them by supporting this Kickstarter campaign. So at least check it out if you would. Check that link out.
A cannon roars from the citadel of Calais, France, blasting smoke and sound out over the English Channel. The crowd cheers, celebrating the momentous event they've all gathered to witness, because that shot has not been triggered with a gunpowder fuse, but rather by an electric pulse sent from Dover, England, along a wire that's been laid along the bottom of the narrow channel separating Britain from France. Later that day, a return signal from Calais sets off a British cannon at the gates of Dover Castle. On November 19th, 1851, two nations are linked by an undersea cable for the very first time.
Think about what a huge deal this is. Up to this point in history, up until, let's say, the beginning stages of the 19th century, when you first get telegraph, messages could only travel as fast as people could carry them, right? So by horse, by sail, by steamship, whatever it might be, we're talking about, by the time of the American Revolution, maybe 6 weeks to cross the Atlantic. A century before that, it's even longer. And even when we get steamships, you're still looking at probably 2 weeks at this point. But now you've got the technology to send messages that could travel across the Atlantic, if you apply this technology, in a matter of hours. And just being able to communicate that quickly across the English Channel, huge deal. This changes the world.
The Times of London declares that this conquest over the waves must ever remain recorded as amid the greatest of human achievement. But some men are already envisioning a grander feat by asking a question. If a telegraph cable could bridge the English Channel, could one span the Atlantic Ocean?
We are so spoiled in that we live in an age of instant communication. A couple weeks ago, I was talking to a friend in Europe and we were doing a video chat. I'm walking around my house holding a phone in my hand that is a video camera, and I'm looking at somebody who's 4,000 miles away and having instant communication. That has not been possible for almost all of human history. Only in the last generation have we been able to do stuff like that. And only a few more generations back, and you're talking, like I said, weeks for communication.
Thanks so much to Factor for keeping us history-loving beans well-fed fast. The arrival of the telegraph in the 1830s was nothing short of a revolution. For millennia, messages could travel no faster than the speed of a horse or sometimes a bird. But by harnessing the power of electromagnetism, messages could now cross entire countries in mere minutes.
Amazing.
And it caught on quickly.
Transportation's the same way with the advent of the train and at the same time. Listen, I know we talk about the incredible advancements in technology that have happened in our lifetimes, and it's true. I mean, the world is a super different place than it was when I was a kid. The internet, personal computers, people have multiple computers in their homes now. The television that we have available to us, the instant access, the 24-hour news cycle, all of that stuff that has happened in our generation, landing on the moon, people that lived to see that. Actually, one of the guys was the first two people to walk on the moon, still alive. Going back 100 or so years, and we're talking about the advent of flight and automobiles, 120 years ago or more. But the 19th century was an incredible time for technology as well.
Opening of the first commercial system in 1837 and the laying of the channel cable 14 years later, almost 30,000 miles of telegraph wire had been strung across Europe, Britain, and the United States. Now, news, diplomacy, and gossip all worked at the speed of electricity. But oceans remained a barrier. While paddle steamers and propeller ships had cut travel times significantly, it still took around 12 days for a letter to cross from London to New York. And it was
which is remarkable in and of itself, because like I said, you go back to the late 1700s and it's 6 weeks, which was still fast, and now it's getting faster and faster.
Limitation that Frederick Newton Gisborne, an Englishman who'd settled in Canada, was determined to remove. A self-taught electrical engineer, Gisborne imagined a line that stretched from the west coast of Ireland to the east coast of Canada, uniting two continents by the miracle of telegraphy. So in 1850...
And people don't realize how close those are. We think of Europe and North America as being 3,000-4,000 miles away, but it's a lot closer than you think. In fact, let's take a look at this here. I mean, if we're looking at like St. John's, we can measure the distance from there to over here on the coast of Ireland. 1,880 miles. I mean, you're less than 2,000 miles at that point. So that's kind of what you're looking at, is around a 2,000-mile underwater cable.
He set out on the first stage of his plan, to lay an undersea cable from New York to St. John's in Newfoundland. I was looked upon as a visionary by my friends, he later recalled, and pronounced a fool by my relatives. And 2 years later, it kinda seemed like his relatives had been proven right. His cable, bought in London from the makers of the channel cable, had broken on the rocky seabed, and he only managed to stake 40 miles of overland wires in the frozen wilderness of upstate New York.
This is the tricky part with this, is that you had this cable, and when you're talking about Transatlantic, you're talking about a couple thousand miles. If it has any fault at any point, if there's any damage anywhere in that 2,000 miles, you can't just go down and fix that little piece. The whole thing's shot.
Gisborne was now $50,000 in debt and facing prison on charges of fraud. So in desperation, he looked for an investor to keep his dream alive. And he found one in Cyrus West Field, a 35-year-old paper magnate. Despite having no knowledge of telegraphy or oceanography, Gisborne's vision of a transatlantic cable would become Field's obsession. He began by forming the Cable Cabinet, a group of investors, scientists, and engineers. Among the first members was actually Samuel Morse, the co-creator of Morse code and the inventor of the telegraph system used in the U.S.
So one thing you have to think about, just kind of, if you're an investor, if you're somebody who's putting up money for this to happen, it's a great deal of risk. But also, what's the reward? I mean, what's the return on your investment? Is it just to invest in some incredible technology, or is there a potential for making money by people paying for these messages to be transmitted across this cable?
While Gisborne was the company's chief engineer, it was now pretty clear that Cyrus Field was now the driving force behind the project. By the end of 1856, Gisborne's line from New York to St. John's was complete, though at the steep cost of $1 million. And this would prove to actually be the cheapest part of the enterprise.
And we're talking hundreds of millions in today's dollars.
That same year, Field ordered 2,500 miles of cable from two British companies, which was loaded into the holds of the HMS Agamemnon and the USS Niagara, loaned to Field by the British and American governments. But due to its colossal weight, the two warships had to share the cable between them. Tossed about on the Atlantic waves, the line broke on the first day that they set out. It was grappled up from the seabed and fixed, but broke again just days later. This time, with 300 miles of cable disappearing into the depths. Undeterred, Field tried again in May of 1858 with a new plan. The Agamemnon and Niagara would meet in the middle of the Atlantic. There, they would splice their two halves of the cable together and then set off back toward Ireland and Canada, laying cable as they went. Despite better unwinding mechanisms,
So let's set the stage. What are we talking about? 1858. This is when Buchanan is president of the United States. Queen Victoria is the queen in the UK. This is just a couple years before the American Civil War. Having instant communication between those two countries at this time in history, super important.
Violent storm engulfed both ships, and the cable broke 3 times before the attempt was abandoned. After this second failure, many investors mulled cutting their losses,
we're out.
Yet Field's optimism managed to keep the project going. On July 29, 1858, the two ships rendezvoused again and spliced cables for a third attempt. This time, the conditions were good, and the USS Niagara made landfall at Newfoundland on August 4th, and the following day, the HMS Agamemnon reached Ireland.
I hadn't even thought about the fact that it would be today that was when this happened. Also my birthday, so happy birthday to me.
The cable had been laid. Then, on August 16th, 1858, the first official message was sent along the line. Directors of Atlantic Telegraph Company, Great Britain, to directors in America. Europe and America are united by telegraph. Glory to God in the highest. On earth peace, goodwill towards men.
That's a quote from the Gospels. The angels appear to the shepherds, and that's what they say.
Jubilation marked the front page of every newspaper. Bells were rung, flags flown, and New York held a parade. Heck, even Tiffany's department store sold unused pieces of the Great Cable as jewelry and decorative furniture.
I have to say one thing I'm really impressed by is how quickly this cable was laid. I'm just trying to imagine thousands of miles of cable like that being loaded on ships. It's an impressive feat. And really, these kinds of crazy things that, whether they work or not, and many times they do work, they're only possible because of people who are seen as crazy by a lot of people. A lot of people would have looked at this and said, that's ridiculous. We're not there yet. It's a crazy investment. But somebody was believing in this enough to make it happen.
Because keep in mind, they were celebrating not just a technical wonder, but possibly a new world order.
Yeah.
Many believed that this new era of communication would usher in world peace. The laying of the telegraph cable is regarded as the greatest event of the present century, said one writer. It is impossible that old prejudices and hostilities should longer exist while such an instrument has been created for an exchange of thought between all nations of the earth. Yet, even amid the celebrations, there were actually grave problems with the cable. First off, the quality of the signal was terrible. Queen Victoria's message of friendship to President Buchanan, sent on the first day, took 17 hours to transmit 98 words. Worse, it was clear that the wire was already degrading. On September 1st, the same day that parties erupted in New York, the city actually received its last completed message from Britain. And by October 28th, the Great Cable was pronounced dead. Henry Field, Cyrus's brother, commented that, "The wonder's not that the cable failed after a month, but that it ever worked at all."
So that's a positive spin there. Yeah, it failed, but holy cow, it worked for a couple of months. Isn't that amazing? That's one way to look at it. I can't believe there weren't some kind of tests done to see if this cable could withstand, the rigors of being at the bottom of an ocean that was a couple miles deep.
News of the cable's failure caused uproar on both sides of the Atlantic. In New York, the festivities were replaced by bitter recrimination. Investors were furious. Some even accused Field and his company of fabricating the project as part of a stock market swindle.
Where have we heard that before? Oh, you just did it for PR. It didn't actually happen. It didn't actually work. It was all a hoax.
Adding fuel to the fire, the next year a 3,500-mile cable intended to connect the Suez Canal to Karachi also failed, meaning no one was in the mood to burn more money in pursuit of Field's dream.
Yeah.
In fact, it was 7 years before Field could try again. After waiting out the Civil War, He formed another group of investors and purchased a new cable in 1865. By then, cables crisscrossed the Mediterranean and the Red Sea,
That's a great point, is that while everybody's focused on what's happening crossing the Atlantic with a cable, cables are going up all over the place. And a lot of this is being spurred by the British Empire, because the British Empire is spread out. You've got India and you've got places in Africa. And of course, other European powers have African colonies. And so there's a lot of incentive for these European governments to want to be able to have instant communication with their colonies around the world.
providing valuable experience for how to pay out the immense weight of thousands of miles of copper and iron. Also, the science of telegraphy was better understood, and superior wires were available. Transmission times had dropped to 8 words a minute, which is much better than 2 minutes per letter that Field's first cable had managed. So
Big
in July
deal.
of 18...
Just in less than a decade. You know, once they see the possibility, now everybody's focused on making this a reality. And so now you have people focused on making it faster, making it more stable, making it hold up better under the circumstances, making it cheaper, making it a better investment.
1865, the SS Great Eastern set out with the new cable. And if you've been following for this entire episode, you won't be surprised when I tell you that predictably things went wrong again. After laying over 1,000 miles of cable,
Halfway
it
there.
snapped, disappearing over the end of the ship.
Do you ever work on a project or you're working on something that's really difficult and you get partway done and then it messes up and you have to start the whole thing over again? I dealt with that recently. I was on the phone with somebody doing an intake for life insurance, and she had to go through all these questions to verify my identity at the beginning of it. And then we got about 3 minutes into the questionnaire and got disconnected. And she called me back, had to do all the stuff at the beginning again. We got halfway through and got disconnected, had to do it all again.
But man, Field could just sense that he was getting close and managed to gather yet more investors for another attempt in July of 1866.
This says a lot about this guy's personality and his ability to sell this, that he kept getting investors.
This time, the Great Eastern steamed across the Atlantic, the Great Cable unspooling smoothly over its stern. And then on July 27th, the connection between Britain and North America was reestablished, and it would remain in place and in use for the rest of the 19th century. And although his grand project was finally complete, Cyrus Field had one last marvel up his sleeve. Later that year, several ships set out toward the site where the 1865 cable had been lost. With grappling hooks on the end of heavy ropes, they trawled the bottom of the ocean 2.5 miles beneath the waves. And despite astronomical odds, they found the lost cable.
Holy
hauled
cow!
it aboard.
That is impressive as heck. Wow.
And it still worked. So they spliced on a fresh length of cable, and now there were 2 telegraph lines crossing the Atlantic Ocean.
Redundancy, always important to have that. Now you got a backup.
Though soon there would be more. Within 5 years, cables would reach places as remote as Japan, Hong Kong, Brazil, and Australia. For the power of the telegraph was immense. Governments could keep watch on their far-flung empires. Stock markets could be rocked by news of a drought in India or a particularly good harvest in Virginia. Friends and family separated by thousands of miles could keep in touch, and a constant stream of news could hum along the web of wires, feeding the public's insatiable hunger to hear what was happening in every corner of the globe.
Think about somebody who was born in the early 1850s. They would have been born into a world that was separated by a couple of weeks to get a message across the ocean. The western United States is completely separate from the east because they haven't connected it yet. In the 1860s, you're going to have a connection by railroad that's going to kind of really make that possible. Then you lay this cable. You're going to have the invention of the automobile in, the 1880s. You have the telephone in the 1870s. You have airplanes in the early 1900s. You're going to have an atomic bomb in the 1940s. You're going to have these huge bombers. You're going to have all this stuff. Stuff that all happened in one lifetime. Amazing.
Like the telephone and the internet that would follow, the telegraph changed the world, conquering not just distance, but time itself.
All right, that was great. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below and check out the gaming channel for the latest series from Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. Thanks for watching.